Okay, I see. Oh, there's Barbara. Okay. Welcome, everyone. It is November 3rd and it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to the Town Council meeting. If for some reason you have not yet voted, please abandon this meeting and go vote. With that, we'll do a roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Syok.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. We will begin with council manager matters. This is an opportunity to report on something that you've done of significance. It's an issue of interest to the council and the town. And we will start with Mr. Rennie.
Just quickly, I attended the VTA Capital Programs Committee on 10/22. I attended Spurs Awards Zoom meeting on 10/27. I took ethics training also from the county on 10/27. On 10/28, I attended the West Valley Mayor's meeting with you to discuss VTA's plans to put Measure B programs on hold in order to pull BART funding forward. Thank you for having me to that meeting. I also attended the San Jose Downtown Transportation Workshop on 10/28, and I attended VTA's Bike Superhighway Community Meeting on 10/29. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Sayak.
Nothing significant to report, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. The wildfire subcommittee had ad hoc committee had 2 meetings. It's moving very quickly. We have established priorities, and that's what we are doing right now. I did attend the community culture workshop. The policy committee had 1 meeting, and at that we discussed and will be making recommendations on potential modifications to the Oak Meadow Bandstand. And the Valley Water Board had a meeting to report out. One is that the board is not increasing its cost for the water, wholesale water costs to the retailers. So that means those charges won't be sent down to those of us who pay the retailers. And also the Valley Water had grant possibilities for jurisdictions, and I've relayed that information to our staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Essentially, my report is the same as the Vice Mayor's, as I'm also a member of the Policy Committee and the Wildfire Ad Hoc Committee. It is moving very quickly. We have another meeting on Monday to prioritize various items and bring back that report. I also attended the West Valley Mayor's meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Pavetti for any kind of announcements that the town manager has.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder that applications close on Friday at 4 p.m. for all of our openings for town boards, committees, and commissions. Please volunteer and apply. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Which brings us to our consent calendar. Our consent calendar consists of 6 items tonight. They are generally, when we put things on the consent, deemed to be non-controversial and able to be moved on or acted upon in a single motion. But that said, any member of the council may pull an item from consent. If an item is pulled, we will just hear it in its normal order as a public hearing. Does any member of the council want to pull any item from consent? Seeing no one, I'll ask any member of the public who's attending with us tonight, if you want to pull an item from consent, put up your blue hand and I will recognize you. I see no one pulling an item from consent, so I'll look to the council for a motion.
I move
Mr.
to
Rennie?
approve,
Oh,
sorry.
no, that's a go. Go ahead.
I move to approve items 1 through 6 on consent.
Second.
Moved by Councilwoman Sayak, seconded by Mr. Rennie. As always on Zoom meetings, we do roll call votes, so I'm going to call for a roll call. Councilmember Rennie.
Yes.
Councilmember Sayak.
Yes.
Vice Mayor.
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. So if you've joined us for an item on the consent calendar, you are free to go. They are approved. Which now brings us to verbal communication. If you would like to talk to the council tonight about something that's not on the calendar and has not been publicly noticed, you have 3 minutes to do so. It's not a normal hearing. We just take information and listen to you for that time on a subject that you want to discuss with us. So if there's anyone that wants to talk to us on verbal communications, please raise your hand and I'll recognize you. And I don't see any hands raised, so I am going to move on. Items 7 and 8 are consideration of basically a salary and bonus action for town employees. Because they're quite similar, I have asked Ms. Velasco to just give a general report, and then we'll need a motion as to each one. So we'll have a single report, look for questions, take comment on both or none, and then we'll go ahead and do an individual action on each of the items. So Ms. Velasco.
Thank you. Good evening, Lisa Velasco, Human Resources Director. Before you tonight is a recommendation to formally approve amendments to the town employment agreements for the town manager and town attorney. As council appointed positions, employment agreement amendments are at the town council's discretion. As such, these positions do not have salary ranges or steps. In compliance with Senate Bill 1436, a summary of the modifications to the amendments include for the town manager's agreement, a base salary increase to $262,500 annually and a one-time lump sum performance bonus of $5,000. For the town attorney's agreement, a base salary increase to $245,000 annually and a one-time lump sum performance bonus of $5,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Velasco. Any questions? Council. Seeing none, anyone among our attendees would like to comment or on these two items? All right, I do not see anybody, so I am going to close the public
Excuse me,
hearing.
Mayor, there is one, Mr. Fago.
I do not see a little blue hand, but okay. I do see a blue hand, but it's not next to his name. Interesting. Mr. Fago.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. This is a little awkward for me because both the town manager and the town attorney are two people whom I highly respect and believe they've been working very diligently for the town. However, following the early 2020 news regarding COVID and its threat to the economic vitality of municipalities like Los Gatos, the town council awarded 3-year salary increases to a number of contract employees in the first quarter of the year. And this included a 3% raise plus bonus as well. This was concerning because the estimates that were being developed then for the income reductions to the town because of the COVID impact had not been calculated. And they were concerned, though, that there was going to be a reduction in sales tax, the hotel tax, and that would impact the budgeting going forward. Also, there could be incremental expenses that were as yet unknown that could impact the town as well. So with that in mind, and the fact that the council has gone forward with additional spending, I was a bit concerned to see these salary increases for the town manager and the town attorney. Again, very good, high quality individuals. I'm just concerned about how we're spending our money at this time, how we're allocating the money without fully understanding what the financial impact will be going forward. And these increases compound annually with the pension obligations and other post-employment benefits that are layered onto all of these for our town employees. And again, I very much appreciate the work that these individuals have been doing, as well as other members of the town staff. But I think we need to be a little more conservative in how we're managing our funds, how we're shifting them from one fund to another in order to meet these new obligations that we're creating for ourselves. And I'd like to see us be more conservative going forward because we don't know what the impact is going to be. Again, that's my personal view and a concern that I have. and I've heard this as well from a number of other people who have expressed it a little more, how should I say? They were more concerned and expressed it a little differently than I've just tried to do tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fago. Are there any questions the council has for the speaker? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Anyone else want to address us on this question? Okay, Ms. Neese, I'm not seeing a hand.
I see no other
So,
hands either.
okay, so I am going to close the public hearing and first ask the council, do you have any questions for Ms. Velasco or a budget question? I saw Mr. Rennie first and then the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Two questions. So first of all, I believe Mr. Fago misspoke. And so for the record, what was the raise that was given earlier in the year to other staff members? I believe it was 1% and he said 3%.
Yes, that's correct.
COLA.
So 1% is correct. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's on the record correctly. Second question, we had an email about where we're pulling the funds from, so there's a question, should we pull the funds from a capital reserve fund or what was called in the email a property surplus fund? And I believe that if the name is correct, we're referring to the fund of money that was left over from the sale of the property to the fire department. So the question, well, correct me if I'm wrong on names, but the question is, does it really matter which one we pull from?
And Ms. Pavetti, are you going to answer that question?
Yes, thank you. I
Thank you.
apologize for talking over our HR.
No problem.
Earlier. Sorry about that. So thank you for the question. The reserve that we are working with this evening is called the Capital/Special Projects Fund. This is a fund where we typically put excess surplus monies at the end of a fiscal year that can be used for special projects at the council's discretion. With the adopted budget that did in fact include decreased revenues due to the economic impact of COVID-19, the town council did use funds from this very reserve to handle such things as tree services, our engineering consultants, and the special election expenses that we incurred for the 2020 election. So it's not uncommon for this reserve to be used for special purposes as deemed appropriate by the town council. So that is the reason why this is the reserve for that. As you recall, in the budget, we were very cautious and conservative about our revenue projections. And so we recommended, and it is in the adopted budget, that the surplus property sale of Winchester should be considered as contingency money in the event that our revenues do not match our decreased projections for 2020, 2021. So in December, you'll get more information about the status of our budget. And if we need to, at mid-year, you may need to tap into that surplus property at that time. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, you had a question?
Sure, thank you. That answered part of my question with regard to the reserve. Since this is employee salary, wouldn't that have been part of our budget? And if not, why? And if not, then why are we going to this reserve? I understand from your response to Mr. Rennie's question what this is, but why are we doing this as opposed to just our budget?
So back in May, when the council held a budget hearing and then adopted the budget in June, we had no idea what council would want to do, if anything, for its council appointees, the town manager and the town attorney. So we do not budget for potential salary increases or in anticipation of a future action of the council. And so for this reason, when the council does do employment evaluations and determines appropriate salary modifications, at that time we need to handle the appropriate budget actions so that way our budget does reflect the intended expenditures.
So maybe I just don't recall have we historically paid the employee salaries, yours and the town attorneys, with funds from our capital special project reserve?
We've done it that way. We've also used in past years the excess or surplus funds from the prior fiscal year. We've used a variety of different mechanisms over the years. This one seemed to be the most consistent with the way our 2021 budget was built, since it also included the one-time bonuses for temporary positions and other things in the adopted budget. So this is a consistent methodology with the way the current adopted budget is built.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of follow-up questions. First, I want to understand the term special project. Is that just another way of saying something that is not actually listed in the budget? So it's not like a special project, build a bridge. It's something that actually hasn't been line item budgeted in, but it's called a special project. Is that right? Okay.
Correct. It's essentially an undefined, it's
just something that's not budgeted, and you can use it as a discretionary manner, in a discretionary manner. The second question, I think you kind of answered to the Vice Mayor, but I want to make sure that I understand the answer, is that you indicated that in doing the town council appointee employees that are yourself and Mr. Schultz, that annually or in a normal year, they do not get budgeted, just like they weren't budgeted this year, because you don't know what the council is going to do. And so that do the funds for when the council does actually give a raise or make an adjustment, are they always going to come out of something that is not budgeted, i.e. a quote special project, unquote?
It could come out of the special project reserve, or as I mentioned, in years past, we've also used the excess revenue from the prior fiscal year. And that's another option. But essentially, this is consistent with how we've done it in the past.
Okay. Other questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Why aren't we using the excess profit from prior years? Because that's what I would have anticipated that we would do.
So that's a good question. So we're just now wrapping up our audit, and we do have a surplus from the close of June 30, 2020. And that money will likely go into the special projects reserve, but council has not taken a budget action yet to do so. So for that reason, we know already that there are funds available in the capital/special projects reserve. And so we'd rather use a known quantity that's already acknowledged in the adopted budget.
And how much is in that reserve?
I would need to ask Mr. Conway or our finance manager to help us with that question.
And I don't need a specific number, I just need a general number.
I think staff are trying to find that information for you now.
Whoever's looking, can you give us an update?
Hello, this is Steve Conway, Director of
Hi.
Finance. With our close of the June 30, 2020 balance, our close of the audit, we're anticipating approximately $11 million in the reserve for special and capital projects at this time.
Other questions? Or follow-up question? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the council for discussion and or a motion. Okay, no one's doing anything, so I will do it. Or there we go, Councilwoman Sayoc.
Thank you. I appreciate the questions that's coming from the public. And I want to assure the public that as council members, we had those discussions when we met privately in closed session as we look at evaluations as well as compensation for the upcoming year. As Mr. Fogo had said, and as we have said in the past with our previous award increases, we appreciate staff, and in this case, we appreciate both Town Manager Pravetti and Attorney Schultz for the work that you did this year above and beyond what is normally done. This year is a special year, and we want to stay in line with what our fellow colleagues, town city managers and town attorneys are also making, so that there is a consistency there, and that we don't fall out of market with these positions. So for a variety of reasons, we did take into consideration the financial constraints that we may be having in the future, but we felt that the recognition and the thank you and gratitude that we have to both Ms. Pravetti and Mr. Schultz is awarded through this compensation. And for that reason, I'm going to do two separate motions. The first, I move to approve an amendment to the employment agreement between the town of Los Gatos and the town manager, and authorize salary and benefit budget adjustments in the amount of $18,431 from available general fund capital special projects reserve.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? I will second it. And I would like to echo what Councilwoman Sayak had to say about these employees and all of our town employees in particular. Over this COVID crisis, pandemic, we have asked our town employees to reinvent the way they work. We have asked them to reinvent the way the town works. We've asked them to reinvent the way our processes work. And they have consistently and uniformly stepped up to the plate. When businesses and residents needed assistance, they were there. And it is very appropriate for us as a town to recognize the value that we are getting from these employees who are going above and beyond this year and making this town work, not only with budgeting, but with our recovery, with assisting our businesses, with assisting our nonprofit partners. And I think that this is entirely appropriate to reward those employees if we can, our bargaining units, as per our discussion that we had earlier, and as per our discretionary employees, to recognize how they have gone above and beyond this year. So I'll second the motion as to Ms. Pravetti. Any other discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayak?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
The mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. Councilwoman Sayak?
Okay, and the second amendment, for the same reasons stated, approve an amendment to the employment agreement between the town of Los Gatos and the town attorney, and authorize salary and benefit budget adjustments in the amount of $13,528 from available general fund capital special projects reserve.
Oh, thank you. Is there a second for that motion? Okay, once again, I'll second it. Any discussion on the motion? And once again, call the question. Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayak?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Velasco, and we'll go to item 9. And I believe that's Heather St. John is going to talk to us about that. Ms. St.
Yes,
John?
good evening. Good evening.
Hi.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Town Council. It's nice to be with you. Heather St. John, Senior Administrative Analyst for the Police Department. Tonight's item for your...
You're kind of going in and out.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I speak up a little. Thank you for letting me know.
That's good.
Okay. Tonight's item for your consideration is regarding California Supplemental Law Enforcement Service Fund, also referred to as SLESIF funds. A council member inquired about the eligible use of SLESIF funds, and upon closer examination, staff is recommending a change. Assembly Bill 3229 created the Citizens Options for Public Safety, also known as COPS program, allocating funds to local law enforcement for frontline law enforcement services. SLESIF monies are specifically intended for use and must be spent on personnel, equipment, and supplies. The city of Montecito also receives a share of SLESIF funds equal to $100,000, and our contract with Montecito stipulates that the Los Gatos Montecito Police Department will provide an additional 416 hours of traffic enforcement within the city limits of Montecito in exchange for their portion of SLESIF funds. The total $200,000 in SLESIF funds, $100,000 from each jurisdiction, has historically been used to supplement the salary, equipment, and training cost of the town's only 2 traffic enforcement motorcycle officers. The police department is proposing an alternative of using the Los Gatos portion, $100,000 of SLESIF funds in fiscal year 2021 to identify and implement equipment and technology that will assist patrol officers in property crime prevention. The police department is looking at innovative technology-based means of preventing and solving these types of crimes. Staff is recommending council adopt the budget adjustment and resolution attachment 1, accepting SLESIF funds, of which $100,000 will be directed to purchase equipment and technology, and $100,000 will be directed toward the contractually required traffic enforcement within the city limits of Montecito. Alternatively, council could continue to use SLESIF funds in the same manner as fiscal year 1920. The $200,000 in SLESIF funds would be used to supplement salary, equipment, and the training cost of the approximate $400,000 expense associated with both motorcycle officers. If this is the preference of the council, it should adopt the resolution contained in attachment 2. This concludes staff presentation, and staff, including the police chief, are available for questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. St. John. We appreciate that report. And let's see if you have any questions. You have one, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And hello, Ms. St. John. Actually, when I was going through the staff report, it wasn't making sense to me, but I didn't know what the question was. Under your explanation, is the total amount that we're awarding $200,000?
That is correct. The total amount of SLESIF funds received is $200,000 when you consider both.
And you had 2 suggestions. You had option 1 and option 2. And in each of those options, is it still $200,000?
That is correct.
Okay. So can you just once again tell me what is the difference between the first and the second? And also, what was the concern that was raised by a council member?
So starting with my understanding is that a council member inquired.
And Ms. St. John, again, you're kind of fading in and out. So.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. My understanding is that a council member generally inquired about options and uses for SLESIF fund, that it was just a general question if there are other items SLESIF monies can be used for. And of course there are. Generally speaking, annually, the police chief can make a recommendation on how SLESIF funds are used. And then getting back to the options and the alternative. So first of all, the first option would be a change, moving the $100,000 that Los Gatos receives and their portion toward the equipment and technology assisting in crime prevention. And that option would be attachment 1 in the first resolution. The second portion of monies that are directed towards Montecito, we are contractually obligated to keep that consistent with what we've been doing, which is that we provide an additional 416 hours of traffic enforcement. So that will not be changing whether you adopt resolution attachment 1 or 2. That will stay consistent. The change would be with the monies received to Los Gatos. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and is the police department making a recommendation as between options 1 and 2?
Yes, we are making a recommendation for option 1, which is resolution attachment 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we lose the mayor?
It looks like we did. Looks like she's frozen.
I don't even have her on my screen anymore.
She's on my screen.
She's on my screen, but she's frozen.
Can I ask a question or do I have to wait for her to come back?
I think you can ask the question.
It's just sort of a follow-up. I'm trying to understand, if we go with option 1, which is put our portion of the money into equipment instead of a motorcycle officer, does that mean we're going to have less motorcycle officers, or we're just going to get the money from somewhere else?
We would not change any staffing, and we would be obtaining the funds from somewhere else.
And so if we go with fund the officer, then we won't get the extra equipment that's being recommended, or we would just go somewhere else for that money to get the equipment?
We would not be getting the equipment unless there was a separate request for that,
Okay.
unrelated to SLESA funds.
I have a question as well.
Okay.
So, how vital is this piece of equipment then?
How vital is the piece of equipment? So
Yeah.
Chief DeCina is gonna speak to the actual equipment.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for the question, Council Member. We haven't specifically identified the piece of equipment. This use of SLESA funds for the 2 motorcycle officers goes back to, I guess, sort of early 2000s. And I've always had a little bit of concern about the funding of essentially one position that is based on grant funding. So technically, the funding is supposed to be utilized for crime prevention, juvenile justice initiatives, and or anti-gang initiatives. So in this case, what we're looking at, what I'd like to look at is the use of ALPR, so automatic license plate readers, either mobile or fixed stationary. So I think that would be, a real, it's being used in Milpitas now. It's a very good effect in terms of identifying. What we're finding, especially in terms of property crimes and auto burglaries, vehicle burglaries, is that they are typically taking stolen cars. They're stealing cars to come into town to steal other cars or break into cars. So if we were to have these ALPRs located at major ingress points into the town, as a stolen vehicle or a wanted vehicle entered into our town, our dispatch would be advised via the technology, and we could direct officers into that area where the vehicle is probably heading. So, our officers do premise checks, especially at night now, but it's just kind of hit and miss. This technology would give us some direction in terms of actually interdicting some of these property crimes.
And a follow-up, if I may.
I apologize, I lost my internet, so I went out and I came back in. Sure, go ahead.
So with this 100,000, is that a one-time cost for this piece of equipment, or would this be an ongoing budgetary line item that we would have to maintain?
It would be a one-time cost, but depending on the scope of what we want to do. There are other items that we looked at. We could use some additional radios. We could use additional body-worn cameras. Again, there might be a use for mobile ALPRs that are located, that we actually place on vehicles. So But really, if you look at the intent of SLESA, it's for these kinds of things to help frontline law enforcement. So there's, like I said, we understand that by taking this 100,000 away from the salaries and benefits of the officer, it has to come from somewhere. But since the council member brought up the question, I figured I'd just jump in with both feet and make a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. I believe the answer, I may have gotten the answer, but where do you anticipate getting the funding that the 100,000 would normally go to if we agree with your recommendation number 1?
And if I may defer to either the town manager or Mr. Conway.
I'll take care of it. Yeah, I'll answer that one. Thank you. So similarly, we would be using that same reserve, the capital/special projects reserve, to backfill that particular line item.
And would you be bringing that issue before the council before you actually do it?
This is the item. If you act to on staff's recommendation, as noted on the agenda, part of the action would be the budgetary adjustment.
So $100,000 from our reserve.
Correct.
Thank you.
Chief, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, whatever item we pick would likely be over $50,000. So I understand there may be some privacy concerns regarding ALPRs. Anything that we do purchase would likely be coming back in front of council.
Because I am the mystery council person who brought this up, I might as well explain it. In the context of looking at innovations and reform in our police department, or how we do policing, it had always struck me that every year on consent, we get this grant and we automatically give it to motorcycle cops. And I thought, well, why are we doing that? Shouldn't we be looking at different models of policing, different uses for grant funds? So this was just a way to try to get a discussion or get some thinking about, why have we been doing this with this money forever? Is it the best use? And if you think about funding 2 positions with grant money, that to me doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, vis-a-vis funding some equipment through a surplus. And eventually you're going to have to figure out how to pay those employees if you're going to keep them going. And a grant funding for employees, I think, is not necessarily, as I understand the grant, how it's supposed to be used, nor should it be a way that we budget going forward. So it was me who asked, what are the ways that this money can be spent? And shouldn't we be thinking about different things in the context of our thinking more generally about policing in Los Gatos? So that was my thought process. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. That sounds like a good thought, but a question for the chief. My concern, and again, this comes forward from the prior 2 agenda items, which is continuing to take money out of this specific reserve. And so the question would be to the chief, if we use the SLEF funds as is recommended in the staff report, would you need the other $100,000 from the reserve in order to pay for what you would normally use the money for?
Yes, that money, those positions are already budgeted, and so we have to make them whole. Otherwise, we would be looking at deleting a position and laying off a staff member, which is not our preference.
But if the positions are positions already funded, it wouldn't have been funded through a reserve, would it?
What we're asking, we anticipated when we built the budget back in the May-June timeframe that council would continue the use of the grant funds to fund both motor officers. However, now that we're here having this conversation, in order to create the opportunity for council to do something different, we have to find a way to offset those expenditures and hence the use of this reserve.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to whatever motions come forward and the arguments for or against them. But continuing to reach into this account to fund various things, including this one, is giving me pause. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. So now I'm going to look to members of the public who might want to talk about this particular item. And if you would like to speak, please just raise your blue hand. I do not see any. Ms. Neese, am I correct? I don't see any.
You are correct.
Okay. So I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing and then look to the council for discussion and or a motion on this item. Mr. Rennie.
I'll go ahead and make the motion to accept staff's recommendation and adopt the resolution in attachment 1. I do kind of like this idea of using these funds for one-time things rather than funding, an ongoing position. That, as the chief was saying, that does sort of make sense to not do that. Yes, we're borrowing, we're effectively extending this year's budget by doing that. We're putting more into this year's budget than originally planned by doing that. But in the long term, I think what it means is, we now have to, if we actually get to the point that we don't have enough anticipated revenue at a budget time, then we would have to reduce staff somewhere or spending somewhere. And that, so it will adjust itself properly. I'm not sure I'm saying this very well. It won't be continuing to come out of that fund, as I believe we're not allowed to do kind of one-time funding of continuous positions, but at a budget time. So anyway, I'm going to make the motion and see if we get a second.
Okay, is there a second on that motion? I will second the motion. I think makes much more sense to use grant funds for projects and things as they come up rather than continuing to fund a position. That doesn't make sense to me from a budget standpoint. And rather than us just automatically using these grant funds for the same thing year in and year out without thinking about it, I very much wanted us to be able to think about policing models. What are we doing? What are our issues? What are our ways to respond? What are different things we can do? And here we had grant funds where we could do something different. And thank you to the police department for actually saying, hey, why don't we look into that versus no, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, but we give it to a motorcycle cop every year. So don't even think about it. So this is an opportunity to actually address a property crime issue that is increasing in Los Gatos and has been a problem throughout the Bay Area. Whether it takes the form that the chief described, or whether it takes the form of we come back and the technology isn't what we wanted, but maybe it's body cameras that we should have, or maybe it's something else that we should have that helps us to really be thinking about our policing models. This is just a tiny step in that direction. So I enthusiastically support the motion, and then we'll look to see what happens after that. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilwoman Sayoc.
A couple thoughts. One is I appreciate the opportunity to reimagine, as the mayor said, and I do thank the chief for looking at alternative ways of this grant funds. It makes sense from a budgetary standpoint, as Councilmember Reddy said, that one-time fund should not be going towards personnel. My hesitation is that the larger picture that I think we should discuss, if not today, but in the future, is what positions ultimately do we want within the police department? How should those be funded? And my overall concern is, given the conversations we've been having, it's great to reimagine, but I don't necessarily want this to always be an increase in budget. And so I look to the chief and Ms. St. John when we do get into budget discussions for next year to be mindful of this isn't just adding on more costs and expenditures, but looking at how we stay within the budget and realigning things and rebudgeting things a little differently to do the work that we want to do.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question then. Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes?
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
Mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. Which brings us to the last item on our agenda, number 10, which is a discussion of various reforms to our policing in Los Gatos that came out of the community conversation. They're listed in the staff report, and very pleased to be joined again by Judge Ladores Cordell, who can help us out with this if we have questions. But I'm going to go to Ms. Pavetti first.
Thank you so much, Mayor and Council. As the Mayor mentioned, this is a follow-up from the direction that Council provided to the staff on September 15th. There were 4 motions that the Council passed, and we are prepared with recommendations on all 4 items. The first item pertains to an independent police auditor function for the town of Los Gatos. We believe we've identified a methodology that will create a clear process that is independent and really meets the spirit of making sure that we have objective analysis for each complaint against a sworn officer. And let me welcome Judge Cordell as well to our meeting, and she's available to help answer questions and detail should the council have them. I also want to recognize the contributions of our police chief, HR director, as well as our town attorney in coming up with the IPA recommendation. This is very much a team collaborative effort, and we are very interested in the council's direction in terms of moving this forward. We believe if council adopts this recommendation, we could issue a request for qualifications for independent investigators and essentially have this program up and running before the end of the year, or maybe shortly thereafter. So this one, we're ready to go. Secondly, the concern about how we handle mental health issues in our community is a very real one. And we've had recent success working with the county and their behavioral health team to address issues here within the town of Los Gatos. And so we are recommending that we continue to work with the county. It's not a perfect system, but they've made some wonderful strides in the last couple of months. And we believe this is the best investment of our town resources. The third has to do with how we respond to non-emergency calls. And this is where we are again asking for a budgetary action. While we do have community service officer interns that work for the town, we believe having a full-time position would really demonstrate our commitment to making sure that non-emergency calls are being handled by non-sworn staff. So there is a budgetary request to implement this particular reform. And then lastly, the town remains committed to transparency and access to data regarding traffic stops and other information, and the report details when our technology will be available to be able to provide the detail that the community is interested in. And we anticipate having some more information in about 6 months or so for the public. So we are committed to these reforms and look forward to council's discussion and action on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti. Before I call for questions from council, just wanted to offer the opportunity to Judge Cordell, if you did want to make any kind of preliminary or introductory or explanatory remarks, you need not, but I wanted to give you that opportunity. And you're muted, Judge.
I commend the people, thank you, with whom I worked with the town in coming up with this idea, this proposal. It is, I think, a model. And I think if the town decides to go forward with this, It's a model for small municipalities, and I don't believe anything like this is being done anywhere. It accomplishes every one of the goals that the community cared about: transparency, being able to have a process that was user-friendly, and one that is efficient. So I'm hoping that you all will look favorably on it, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Judge. So Council, let me open it up for questions for whoever might be appropriate to answer your questions. That's so convincing. There's no questions. Councilwoman Saya.
I do have two questions. The first with the independent police auditor function, and I want to frame it as under the umbrella of just the independence. And so I'm going to ask, and then I'll let you guys decide who best answers it. So I'm looking at attachment 1, and there are 2 areas that I wanted more conversation about. The first is with regards to who could serve on this. And one statement is that retired police command officers who conduct police agency investigations would be eligible to apply. So my question to that is, what I've heard, and this is where I'd love some feedback, is that there is a bias that if you have a police officer, even if it's not within your own, investigating other police officers, that there will always be a bias in a favorable, there's just favoritism there. And so could someone address, well, one, is that true? And then, would anyone like to speak to that?
Sure, I'm glad to speak. Am I unmuted at this point?
Yes, you're fine.
Great, sure. So you raise a good point, and these are very good questions. Everyone has biases, so let's just get that out there. There's no one that doesn't have bias. So the concern, I think, is twofold. One of the optics. What are the optics like for the public to see that maybe someone on this panel has worked previously as an investigator for the police? By investigator, what we're talking about are people who have worked in internal affairs, maybe in another department, and they know how to ask questions, they know how to investigate. I have worked with a number of officers in internal affairs, and I've found an occasional one that was objective, that could objectively investigate. So I think there's one, a concern about the optics. The other is there are individuals who can do this objectively, and that's why this proposal also has a selection process. It has the town attorney, and if it is the desire of the town council that I participate in selecting the people who will be on the panel, we'll be looking exactly for these biases and for objectivity. I think probably the best people to do this work are retired attorneys, not necessarily people in police, but the idea was not to rule out someone who might be very good at this, who might have had some background in law enforcement work.
Thank you, Judge. Does that answer your question, Councilwoman Saya?
It does. And so then I guess the follow-up, would you like follow-up, or would you like just
no.
first questions?
Go ahead with follow-up.
So then, Judge, I appreciate that answer. How does then one decide? So if we are looking, we're sending out this RFQ, and the selection process would then delve into this bias. Who would be, I mean, how does one even know how to ask the right questions?
Well, certainly it's very hard to detect bias, particularly for people who don't know they have a bias. But I think that with the town attorney's experience and my own, at some point you get a sense about the people to whom you're speaking. You know the kinds of questions to ask, and you look at the person's track record or their history. So as I said, my inclination is to probably look more favorably toward getting a lawyer or lawyers on the panel, but I wouldn't exclude people who have some police experience. But it's like anything else. I know maybe in your own experience, you've had to go hire people, and it's hard. It's very tricky. So you have to look at a number of factors: the track record, how they respond when they're actually doing an interview. Do they know how to write reports or memos? Because that's going to be part of this as well if you adopt it in terms of writing a summary of the investigation. So part of it is you know it when you see it, and the other is using the skill sets we have in order to kind of weed out people.
Okay, thank you. And my last question.
Just a second, Councilwoman Sayoc. Chief, you had your hand up? And there you are.
Yes, thank you. Just to add to what the judge was saying, I think it's, and I recommended that we add retired, and I focus on command officers who are in their career, typically are in that position where they have to do these kinds of investigations. And I think there's a certain aspect where, optics aside, because that's always going to be an issue if you have a police officer investigating other police officers. But the reality is it's not a very large group of these command officers. Typically are retired chiefs or retired captains that are doing these kinds of investigations, and they have a bona fide business. I think town manager inserted that specific phrase. And if you're doing this as a business for municipalities and counties, and you don't have the reputation or don't have the ability to be objective and impartial, that's going to show, and you're going to get a reputation as such. And it's also written into the RFQ that if there's poor performance on the part of these investigators or IPAs for a variety of reasons, that they will be removed. So again, though, I think I agree with the judge that a lot of it is just getting a sense of the person's prior work and the person that they are. I think we will arrive at a good panel of IPAs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilwoman Sayoc, you had another question.
Yes, my last question. So I'm looking at page 3 of the report now, where we're now implementing once an investigation has been completed and a report has been written. At the bottom of page 3, if after reviewing the report and its findings, the chief disagrees, the town attorney will consider and determine if the investigator needs to do additional work. So my question, again, I'm trying to think through this process and looking at how to maintain the appearance of independence. Does that report stand even if there is a disagreement? So I'd like to work through with the town attorney how this works. Like, how does one determine whether or not, if you have 2 separate opinions, is it the town attorney's then judgment to get another report, and that report will then try and reconcile the 2 different opinions?
Correct. So the whole notion is that there would be should there be a disagreement, the police chief would be able to identify his concerns to the town attorney. The town attorney would look at the first report unchanged to determine whether or not any additional analysis was needed. It might be that there was a gap or an oversight, and the town attorney says, oh, there is a gap or an oversight, and we do need to address that. So then the first investigator would need to do that. And then upon completion, they would put up their revised report. And if it is fine, then it does stand. The important point is that the police chief is not modifying the investigator's report at all. He's just looking at it and saying, I disagree. If the disagreement is serious enough and the town attorney believes that it needs to be investigated by somebody else, then we would have a second investigator examine the issue, and the town attorney would then determine which report stands. So this just is anticipating a possibility of a disagreement and addressing it up front, so that way we aren't making it up as we go. So, it's possible that reasonable minds might differ, but the idea is that the town attorney would have the authority to determine which report stands unaltered.
If I could jump in and just add one more thing.
Please.
I believe that explanation was perfect, but let me explain. The 5 years that I was the independent police auditor for the city of San Jose, what we did was precisely what we're putting into this proposal. And is that, except that in the city of San Jose, the police investigated themselves. But our role was to have oversight over that report. So I would see a report and I'd say, well, wait a minute. you didn't interview that witness, or wait a minute, that analysis is not objective, and then push back so that the report would have to be, didn't have to be, but many instances was rewritten, or because there were things that were left out. So that's the first part. And that's the part of the, the town attorney can look at it and make sure that everything was done properly. So if the chief sees a report and says, well, wait a minute, they didn't investigate the second officer who was a witness to this, and that might add something, that's appropriate. And so there can be pushed back to the independent auditor to make sure that gets done. Now, a good independent auditor wouldn't get that pushback. You want an investigation that's thorough and that's fair and that is objective. So that's the first part. The second is just a big disagreement. So if a finding is made by the independent police auditor on the panel, and the police chief looks at it and says, I really do not agree with this analysis, because what it is, it's an analysis. Here are the facts, here's the rule, and here's where we come out on it. So if the chief pushes back, it's left to the town attorney, who really doesn't, he is or she's the most objective in this, can then say, well, look, let me determine if this is really there is a basis for us to maybe take another look at this from another investigator. My sense is that such an occurrence will be very rare, if at all. That's that second part. And if we have good auditors, you won't even have the first part where a person has to go back and redo their investigation because it wasn't thorough enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rennie, you had your hand up?
I'm going to wait till after you go to the public.
Okay. So Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Question for Judge Cordell. You indicated that you had experience when the police were involved and that when they were not. Do you have a recommendation?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I was under the impression that you had said that you had experience where there were police officers involved in the analysis and when there were not. Did I misunderstand you?
And don't mind, my screen is blank because a phone call came in and it'll go off shortly. It will go off. So if you can hear me, I will explain. So the model that is utilized in San Jose is one in which the police investigate themselves. And it's a model that is now on being put to a vote by the community. It was put on by the city council to change that, so that the police no longer investigate themselves, because there's a real problem with that. There is lack of trust from community. There was a sense that the investigations contain a bias, and there was very little accountability. So it's not a system that I was happy with when I was there for 5 years, but I couldn't do anything about it because my hands were tied. But there's been a sufficient pushback to change that. I don't know if I'm addressing your question or not, but.
Let me try, if I may, Vice Mayor. I think that the Vice Mayor is asking, Councilwoman Sayak was concerned that part of the eligible pool for investigators may include police personnel. I believe you said that, yes, there could be an optics problem with a bias, but you've also had an experience where police personnel have been effective and objective. So I think that's the question.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, for misunderstanding you. So there were instances, because as the police auditor, where I sat in on investigations that were conducted by the Internal Affairs Unit, the San Jose Police Department. And there were officers in Internal Affairs who did, in my view, conduct fair and objective investigations and make fair and appropriate findings. So there are some, many, in some instances, that was not the case. The bigger issue was, even though there may have been some officers who did a fair and objective job, there was the optics problem. The issue was a community would see that the police were investigating themselves, and it just presented a problem. So in my view, I think the first people up should be preferably retired attorneys who have the kind of background that's noted in this proposal. But I see no problem with including and allowing the city to take the town to take a look at some people who may have some affiliations with the police.
All right, that answers the question. Thank you. I'll wait until we get public input before I ask my other questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Chief, you had your hand up. You're muted. Chief, you're muted. You're on mute.
I apologize. I think Judge Cordell really spoke to the issue about utilizing officers and my ability to challenge findings very well. And I would just say from my experience, I had sort of the opposite experience of the judge as the IPA. I actually had an external investigator conduct an investigation that was really poorly done. And it ultimately, the officer ended up getting their job back. So I want the ability to challenge the finding if I find that there's an issue with it. But I have a great deal of confidence in the town attorney, and I really feel that, you know, his focus is the best interest of the town. And I think if there's, let's say, we all have our disagreements, but the other factor that is really going to be pivotal is the fact that most of our investigations are going to involve body-worn camera footage. So a lot of these are really not going to be whodunits. They're really going to be backed up by and large by body-worn cameras. So there is an interpretation factor in terms of video footage, but the reality is most of the cases are not, and we're talking 3 to 4 cases a year. They're not going to be complex investigations.
Thank you, Chief. Any more questions before I see if somebody from the public wants to talk about this? All right, I don't see anyone. So do you still have 3 attendees? Let me see if any of them want to speak. Leafa, go. Just go ahead and unmute yourself when you're ready.
I just want to first emphasize the fact that I'm very impressed with the police services in town, consistently very good, and I appreciate it. Also, I've got to say that I've also was very impressed with the workshop that was conducted and the type of exchange of information that was done, and these actions by the town council now to make some additional, I wouldn't call them reforms, but some editing to the police services going forward. Regarding the topic right now, which is the oversight committee, I'd like for it to be really oversight and not hindsight, which means that it requires, the process now is for somebody to make a complaint and then there's an investigation. With oversight, there should be the same committee looking at ongoing services, ongoing activities, and maybe there's some efficiencies, there's some improvements that can be done without people having to complain about them. And the mix of the committee as being discussed this evening, I think is very good, very healthy. But I think let's make it more positive in terms of how we craft the review and the making recommendations going forward. And I also very much appreciate the fact that the police are including the non-criminal services that they're providing, and they're collaborating with the county to bring in the right resources to help de-escalate these situations. Again, thank you for that. Truly appreciate it. And keep up the good work. That's it. I'm just wondering if maybe a citizen or two could be appointed to such a committee to help with the oversight, and to provide that different perspective. Something I'd like for the council to consider as they start looking at the membership to the oversight committee. And I have to comment on my own comments from earlier, that I was saying that the raises that were mentioned before for the town staff, the 3% I was speaking of was the first 2 years of the current 3-year contract. Those were the 3% raises. I didn't mean that the current one would be a 3% raise. I just needed to clarify it. I may not have been specific enough in making that statement. So again, keep up the good work. Thank you very much. And the other thing is just a little more transparency, and so we can see how we're doing financially as a town going forward, and to let us know if we're in the kind of financial shape that we're for the spending that we're doing, do we have those funds to continue to fund us as we'd like? Thank you again very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frigo. Are there any questions to the council, Mr. Frigo? I don't see any. When you do speak on an item, I think the council would appreciate if you actually talk about that item. I know that Mr. Frigo was talking about the item before us, but also other items, so that would be helpful. The other thing I want to remind the council is that what's being proposed is not a committee. It is a rotating board of investigators who are available to look at complaints. Just an item of clarification. So Jeff Suzuki.
Hi, everyone. Could you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank you all for having the community conversation and these reforms. I greatly appreciate the diligent efforts to listen and implement the will of the community. So thank you. There are a few things after reading the proposed independent police auditor function that I find a little bit troubling. First, there's a section that says to provide an annual IPA report to the town council and the community to foster transparency and accountability. I don't think that we should wait for an annual report. I think that the community should know the results of the investigation right away, uploaded online for everybody to see, perhaps on the website. It should be public information as soon as possible. Secondly, there's a part that says the chief of police will determine the appropriate discipline for the officer based on these findings. Discipline may be coordinated with the human resources director to ensure appropriate appeal, skelly rights of the employee. I think that the purpose of having independent oversight is that it's independent. While I believe that the chief of police as a position could have influence into discipline, and I like Chief DeCina, I do not believe that the position itself should be solely in charge of that decision. There's a potential conflict of interest here. I think that there needs to be, we should strongly consider having some democratic element involved in this decision, possibly the town council in approving the decision of the discipline. Perhaps the chief of police could propose something and it could be approved. But I do think that there, as Lee Fago said, there should be some sort of democratic or civilian element to implementing discipline. Regarding the implementation of the collaboration with mental health services that I see here, I think that this is a good first step. But at the end of the day, we will have to think out of the box. We will have to cut down the number of hours, service hours in the police department by around 30% to have a sustainable budget from our 2015 staff report. This will take out of the box thinking. And as we know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We know that mental health, mental illness is an excellent predictor of not only the perpetrators of crime, but the victimization. So instead of just responding to calls, for instance, we should very strongly consider improving the mental health of the community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. Are there any questions? Okay, I don't see anybody else who's actually joined us tonight, and the two people who are there have already spoken. So I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. I'm going to look to council for any further questions on this matter, and then go to discussion and or motion. So any further questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Following up on Mr. Suzuki, I had sort of a similar issue when I read the report, our staff report. It talks about the mayor having the option. The mayor may agendize the independent auditor report. And my thinking was the independent auditor report should be made public, and it shouldn't be a discretionary thing with whoever the mayor is. So my question to whomever is, why is it framed in this manner at this point?
So I'll start and others might want to join in. So the whole point is that the report will be public. It will be posted. It will be publicly available. It will be transparent. It will contain the summary of the complaints and the findings, but it will not contain any confidential information. Our agenda format, process, and policy allows the mayor to determine whether or not an item is placed on the agenda. And so we did not want to tie the hands of future mayors, given that this is a new process. I believe, given the spirit of this conversation, that most likely our mayors will want to have this report on the agenda for public comment and discussion. But again, this is just consistency with the way we handle agenda items currently in the town.
Thank you. Understood. I do understand that as mayor, I could put things on the agenda. I understand that 2 council members could put things on the agenda. But what I'm looking at right now is when we follow through with this policy or whatever we're calling it, that the public exposure should be part of the policy.
Other questions? Mr. Rennie.
Get myself off of mute. Okay, thank you. So on the police auditor function, what I was hearing Judge Cordell saying was, we really want to have retired judges, retired attorneys as the investigators, but we don't want to close it out to retired police command staffs, shall we say. So what came to me, and I realized that each investigation is by an individual and not by, but I think of it sort of as a whole department of 5. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't put a limit of like something in here, say a limit of 2 former police employees or something like that, so that our department as a whole looks like it's not a majority or even all former police employees. And, you know, we have this intention right now. We're putting something in place that I expect is going to last 10 years, 20 years. In 15 years from now, 3 police chiefs from now and 2 attorneys, you know, what we're thinking is going to be just what's written here, which could turn out to be 5. You know, you manage to put, or, you know, some police chief manages to put 5 of his old buddies from somewhere in the department. You know, wouldn't it be better to put some limiter in the resolution that says no more than 2, and maybe the number's 3, but maybe the chief or Judge Cordell could speak to that. You know, I guess the worry would be, well, if we limit it to 2, maybe we can't get 5. But again, what I heard was we really want attorneys, and maybe we have some former police officers also.
Yeah, I can address that if you like. I like your suggestion. I reiterate that I think it is important. Optics are important, regardless of how qualified the person may be, given what the community concerns are. And by the way, retired judges would be fine, as well as retired lawyers if you can find them. It was my understanding when the city attorney and I talked about this proposal with the town attorney with the town manager, is that his feeling was that he could find a good number of qualified retired attorneys to do this work. So I don't think it's going to be hard for him to find, he has wonderful connections, for him to find 5 people who are not police related to fill it. So I don't know that this proposal mandates that the 5 positions have to be allocated in some fashion to someone who has been, maybe had prior police experience. I don't think it says that. It just says that that option's available. So that's the first thing. Second, if I understand, I think you make a good point down the line. I just think it's important for thinking ahead to make clear what this town council's intentions are in putting this together. And perhaps there's some language you could utilize that maybe says we give a preference. It is the desire that these positions be filled by people who are not previously affiliated with police departments, although it does not exclude them. Maybe something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify that the police chief has no role in selecting the independent investigators. You would have the ability to look at the resumes and provide any comments to the selection panel, which we're hoping will include Judge Cordell as well as our town attorney, but the selection is not made by the police chief. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie, did you have a follow-up?
I have a question on another subject. I would just say that, I think we should add some language in there that says it, it can't be all police department, just for the future. But if I could change subjects.
Yes.
Nobody's made nobody's asked any questions about the CSO that we're talking about hiring for $148,000 a year. The first question I have on that, it talks about they can do other law enforcement services, or they can do traffic control duties. Does that mean if we added this person, they would be able to help with beach traffic kinds of issues?
Go ahead, Chief.
Council member, I can weigh in if you wish. It would traffic control is a wide variety of duties. It could be, but again, having one CSO is probably likely not going to help facilitate the traffic flow during a beach traffic weekend. But it would encompass traffic control duties.
I know we've been hesitant to commit too much police to that because it's could be a very deep sink of manpower. And I was wondering if this would be enough but it sounds like it's still not enough to really plan to do much with beach traffic.
Yeah, unfortunately, council member, if you look at some, say, Highway 9 and University, or Highway 9 and North Santa Cruz, I mean, to control an intersection like that, you really need at least 2 traffic control personnel, and sometimes even 3, because as you know, people in a rush to get places, and you just have, it makes it very difficult to do it with certainly a single person, but at least a minimum of 2.
Okay. So my second question on this, and I'll say, I really hesitate because again, we're talking about adding to our budget. We've already, I think, added 100,000 to our budget now for police. Now we're talking about adding another 150,000 in round numbers. The question is, what is a typical fully loaded officer cost compared to the CSO that costs only 150,000? I'm a little surprised the number got this big, and so I'm curious, what's a fully loaded officer cost?
I don't know the exact figure. It's in excess of $200,000.
Okay, so this is maybe a police officer taking duties on at 3/4 of the cost is the way we should look at it then. Okay, thank you. And Mayor, I would just comment again, I'm hesitant that, do we really want to add more to the budget at this time? I know we talked about offloading the officers with a CSO, but really all I see is us adding to the department. Maybe another question for the chief. If we added this position, what are we getting from the sworn officers? Less burnout? That they're more alert on the job because we're not overworking them, but what am I really getting by adding another 150,000 to the department budget?
Councilmember, thank you for the question. I think what you're getting is the ability for our officers, as you know, we're a very high touch department. Our customer service level is very high. We respond to all calls. So what we have is an opportunity to utilize this non-sworn personnel, a community service officer, to respond to some of those low-level calls that do not require a police officer. They may be report calls, We envision them doing continue incorporating some duties about towing abandoned cars. We'd like to work with Director Paulson and maybe look at having them do some town code violations like barking dog, leaf blowers. So it'd be a amalgamation with a number of factors. But I think the advantage is that you have CSOs, these community service officers, responding to those kinds of calls, leaving officers to do more proactive police work or premise checks, high visibility foot patrol, stuff that I think police officers are more suited for.
Okay, and again, I'll just comment that I'm a little hesitant at this time to be adding, to the budget this way. I thought our real intent was to kind of try to find ways to spend more or put more emphasis towards mental health response. And I realize we got this whole thing going on with the county. But if we were going to be adding 150,000 to the budget, I got the impression we really wanted to go more towards mental health kind of officers. So I'm hesitant to add this position at this time, given our budget uncertainty and so forth. And maybe it's something we talk about next year, but I'm hesitant to add it at this time. That's all my questions and comments for now, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Saig, have you asked questions already? Because I have a couple questions, but
Go
ahead.
I'll go last. Why don't you go first, Mayor?
No, go ahead.
It was a follow-up to that question to the chief. So my understanding with that suggestion, again, following the spirit of the conversation that we had with the community, is that this would basically replace a sworn officer. And the idea and the premise was that we were going to move away from having sworn officers respond to non-emergency calls. So my question to the chief is, I know at one point we had certain vacancies. How many vacancies remain from the FTEs that are committed? And I'm sorry, Chief, but you're on mute.
Apologize again. So currently we are authorized 39 sworn personnel, of which we actually have 32, but that's 32 is street ready. So we have 3 recruit officers that are in training. We have 3 officers that are in on long-term leave for a variety of reasons. And then we have actually 1 vacancy.
Okay, so then the question that I posed to the chief, and you may want to think about it, is if this FTE were to replace the sworn officer FTE, so your budget doesn't increase, but it also, in my opinion, addresses the spirit of where the conversation was going. What are your thoughts to that?
To be honest, council member, like I said, I would not be willing to trade a vacancy for this community service officer. So the concept of the CSO came about as a result of the community conversations. I think it's a very valid concept because we do respond to a lot of non-emergency, non-critical calls for service that could be absorbed by that. I actually had requested an additional officer in light of the fact that we are incorporating or absorbing county pockets. We're looking at North 40. I think at 39, and we haven't actually been at 39 for a while. We're gradually working our way there. But even at 39, things are pretty slim in terms of police staffing in the town of Los Gatos. So my preference, if you're telling me, if I'm willing to give up that vacancy in order to get the CSO, in my mind, that would not be a good trade.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you very much. Just a couple. This one's for Judge Cordell. With respect to having allowing the chief to look at the report and weigh in, you indicated that when you were auditor, that's what you did. You looked at it and you decided, was it inadequate? Was it inadequate? Did it beat something? In my mind, that's a little different than having an independent report done and then having the chief independently be able to go like, well, I disagree. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on that, because I, like Mr. Suzuki, was of the impression that, independent review is independent review. And so if the person comes in and makes a determination, I wonder why the chief should be able to say, well, I essentially don't like that, and then have an entirely new investigation. So I was wondering what your experience was and what your comments were on that.
Sure. In San Jose, when our office wrote a report saying the investigation was not thorough and fair, that was done by Internal Affairs. That report, that was our report. No one could change it, but it went to the chief of police. And if the chief disagreed with it, he could not change the report, but he certainly had a conversation, I recall, many of them with me, saying, this is why we disagree with this. And once again, I want to stress, as the police auditor, we could not make findings. It was all done by the police. We could only look at their reports and say, that's not objective, or that analysis is not good, or that finding is not legitimate. We couldn't make them do anything. That's what's undergoing a change now in San Jose. So what I understand the proposal for the town of Los Gatos is that you have an independent police auditor who does an investigation, writes the report, and makes findings. Once that is done, it is submitted to the town attorney. The town attorney looks at it and makes sure that all the areas are covered. Is it thorough? Is it objective? Is it fair? So the chief absolutely has a right, I think, to look at the report, and he can express his opinion about whether or not he thinks the report is a fair report or unbiased. My understanding is the chief cannot change that report. Then it's left to the town attorney. So the town attorney becomes key in here to decide, this is it. This is the report. I think it's done fairly. It's fine. This is how it stands. So there may be, and I think this is what is anticipated in the proposal, a situation where the town attorney looks at it, hears from the chief, and thinks, either you, auditor, I need you to go back and do this again, or look at X because you didn't look at X, or for some reason, and I can't come up with what it would be because I've never had that situation, says, you know what, I'm going to get a second opinion on this, and then kind of work this out. I have never had that experience. So this could have been, and I just can't remember, this was a compromise that was worked out in getting this proposal together. So I cannot address that. I think if that were to happen, I can't imagine how it would happen. It would be rare. So if that doesn't happen, what we're saying is there's a report, it's done. The chief can have his opinion, but there's no editing that's being done by the police department or anybody else.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I understand that he can't change it. I'm just wondering whether, and I agree that he has a right to see it. My only question is, does his opinion about it need to trigger further action and potentially an additional investigation? So that's kind of what I'm sort of thinking about as I muse about this proposal. And this, I don't know who this is for, the town attorney or Ms. Pavetti, but the chief just indicated that he would not trade a sworn officer for a non-sworn community services officer. And my question is that his call to make, or is that the council's call to make, or the town manager's call to make with budgeting issues?
It's ultimately the town council's decision through our budgeting process. I think the chief is accurate in terms of acknowledging how lean our police staff is, given the territory that we patrol and are responsible for. And I think we also need to be very mindful that we did add additional population with the county pocket annexations without adding any additional sworn officers. And we are in construction now with North 40. And so we will have increased demand for police services. At some point, the council will need to talk about appropriate staffing for the police department through its budgeting process. And if the CSO is not something that the council is interested in pursuing right now, we completely respect that and understand it. We just wanted to give you an option in terms of how we could address those non-emergency calls.
Okay, thank you. Chief DeSena.
And Mayor, and please forgive me if I wasn't, didn't mean to appear as though I was stamping my foot. I was, I think, offering opinion to Councilmember Sayoc about what my choice on one of the two. It's obviously the council's decision as to which way to go in this particular matter. So if that was, if I was misinterpreted, please forgive me.
Totally understood. I understood it that way. I just wanted to answer the question about who gets to actually decide that. Other questions before we move on to our discussion? Okay, given the way that this discussion has gone, I think it may be more productive and more efficient if we were to take each of the 4 suggestions individually and maybe do the easier ones first and then move to the more difficult. So I'm going to suggest that the first thing we do is, well, actually, I think they're probably all difficult. I was going to think that the easiest discussion would be D, the timeline for reporting data. So does anyone have a motion or discussion regarding that particular item? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Okay, that of all of the recommendations in the staff report, that one I had no concerns with. So I'll go ahead. If the idea is to have 4 separate motions, I'll move that we acknowledge the timeline for police stop data availability contained in the staff report and follow staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that matter before I call the question? All right, Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes.
Councilman Rennie,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector,
Yes.
and the mayor votes yes, so that passes unanimously, that portion. Perhaps maybe the working with the County of Santa Clara regarding responses to mental health, B. I would suggest maybe we do that one next because we had the least amount of discussion regarding that. Or not the least, the next least. Any discussion on that item? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Oops, sorry about that. This one, similar to the first, I think we had great discussion. I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation of working with the county now that they are fully staffed. But this is an area that I think we should be monitoring because county personnel seem to fluctuate on a regular basis. And so at this time, I'm prepared to move that we work with the County of Santa Clara regarding responses to mental health and homeless calls for service, with the understanding that we will be looking at this on an annual basis to monitor how well those positions are staffed and response times to our local calls.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor in a second, Vice Mayor.
I'm going to support the motion in its entirety. I would hope that the entire motion is included because I think the issue with the county could definitely be an issue.
Okay, any other comments before I call the question? Okay, we're going to go backward this time. Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, so that portion passes unanimously. So let's move to the independent police auditor function. Then maybe we can let Judge Cordell go and watch election results. So what's the discussion, if any, on that? Or if there is no discussion, is there a motion on it? Mr. Rennie.
I would like to make the motion to approve it with addition, and I don't know, do I need to give exact words? I'd like some words that says that we prefer retired attorneys or judges, and we have a maximum of 2 former police staff.
May I ask a question before I call for a question on you, or a second? As I understand the proposal, it's basically a pool. And the pool can be there's 5 people and they rotate on and off, or they could leave, or they could come back. So at any given time, you may have people who are in X profession or Y profession or whatever it might be. So I'm curious how a limitation of a number works in that model. So Mr. Rennie, what's your concept of how that would work?
Isn't that really a question for staff?
Could I say?
Okay, I don't think so, but Judge Cordell?
Yeah, I would say if you wanted to go in this direction, I would just say a preference should be given to retired attorneys or retired judges who have that expertise that's written in the proposal. And I think it would not be good to just set a number, but just make it quite clear what your intention is, that that's the preference for filling those slots.
I'm okay amending my motion to make it a preference, as Judge said.
All right, Vice Mayor Spector.
With that clarification, I'll second it.
Okay. So any discussion on this motion? Councilwoman Sayoc?
Just a quick question to the town attorney. So Mr. Schultz, given the conversations and clarifications we have with regard to the bottom of page 3, once findings are made and there's a disagreement, is it also your understanding, since you'll be executing this, that the report will not change, and that if there is disagreement, your role is to further probe into that without changing the report itself?
That's correct. And so I've been involved in these over my 33-year career quite a bit. Prior to coming to Town of Los Gatos, I actually conducted these investigations for many towns and cities. So I've seen a number of them. And as we go through the RFP, that'll be something we will do, is see some of their decisions, their reports that were written, to look at those and see that they are, as unbiased as possible and they're fair and objective. But yes, if in fact, and there's been a couple times where I've reviewed a report and I've said, look, I see that you've either unfounded it or whatever your conclusion was, but I didn't quite, through your analysis, understand how you got to that conclusion. Or that you need to go back and do that. But I don't influence what their decision is. I just make certain, just as when you make a decision on land use, I want to make sure the findings and evidence supports your final decision. I don't challenge your final decision. I just try to do as best as I can to look at those findings and decisions. If in fact, if that's all done and I feel there's that he's done that, the independent, there wouldn't be a second one. But if in fact the analysis, that person couldn't get to the findings and the chief saw that and I saw that, then there's that ability to go back out and look at a second independent investigator to do another report. But the first one wouldn't change. It would just be there standing alongside the other one. And then again, both of those get sent to the chief, and the chief is the one that would decide what the discipline would be.
Okay, thank you. And then just, if I may, through the mayor, make a question or request to the maker of the motion as well as the seconder.
Yes, go ahead.
And that is the suggestion of, instead of compiling it into an annual report, that once the findings are made, that it just be made public and released. If you would be willing to incorporate that.
I believe that's part of it. I think Judge Cordell wants to address that.
Yeah, could I address it? So
Sure.
What normally happens is that a complaint's filed, it's investigated. The person who complained is then given the response. They finally get the findings. It's not really supposed to, it goes to the complainant. So that's why I think it's appropriate not to do, okay, here it is, and now I'm going to give it to everybody. It goes to the complainant, and then with information redacted as to the name of the complainant, the name of the officer, then at the end of the year or semi-annually, whatever you want, here the proposals annually, then it goes into a report where the fact, it's specific, what the complaint was and that there was an investigation and what the findings are. So I think it's appropriate. It's certainly done in most jurisdictions that have independent oversight like this. The complaints, that goes to the complainant, the findings, and then there's a final report. So I think it's fine this way, and I think it's transparent.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Could I add one more thing, Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, it is my hope that when the panel is selected, that it is a diverse panel, that there are women on it, there are men on it, that there are people of color. And I got a sense when I was working on this with Mr. Schultz, that's absolutely what his intention is, to try to bring as diverse, qualified panels we can get. And again, part of it is optics, sadly, because we live at a time where optics are now very, very important. And the other is because it's really the right thing to do. So he and I spoke about that, and that's part of the intention in going forward.
Vice Mayor, you had your hand up.
Thank you. As the person who seconded the motion, I'm going to need a little clarification from what Judge Cordell just said. Because I support and supported a public report, but am I hearing that it is, I understand the redaction and all of that, but is this report then not public? Does it go before the council?
You can go ahead and answer.
Sure. If the question is to me, the report is always public, always. And that's the beauty of it all. So at the end of the year, everybody knows how many complaints, what they were, the nature of them, specific facts, and what the findings were. That what has to be redacted under present law, the name of the officer, and then the complainant has a right of privacy, so you don't put the complainant's name in.
Thank you. And you keep mentioning annually or semi-annually, and given the fact that, you know, Los Gatos is probably not going to have the number of issues that San Jose does, is there any magic to this annual or semi-annual as opposed to making it public or potentially making it public when it's completed?
So in my view, because there are very few coming in, probably that will be in Los Gatos, you could do a quarterly report, you could do it semi-annually. It's not a big deal. It's a compilation of all of the memos that the auditors will have completed, put together, and with appropriate redactions.
All right, thank you. And so again, as the person who seconded the motion, I guess I would look to the mayor and the maker of the motion just to confirm that understanding that the Judge Cordell just verbalized is part of the motion, and that even though the police chief may see the report, it can't be redacted.
Yes. Yes,
I'm
that's
sorry.
my understanding.
Okay. And just a further clarification on my part is that the council can, of course, determine whether it wants it to be annual, quarterly, or semi-annual, or whatever it may be. Do we need to do that now, or do we do that once we get up and running?
We can do that at any time. Really, this would become an administrative procedure. And so at any time, we might be making tweaks along the way. I think in the spirit of transparency, you know, it might be of interest to provide those summaries on a quarterly basis, just so that way the community knows that this process is up and running. And that way folks know that we are very serious about taking those complaints seriously and, you know, doing the independent evaluation.
Mayor, could I suggest, I was just wondering, Mayor, if I suggest that the language would be at least annually and then more frequently as the council determines.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. I was going to ask the maker of the motion if he might say quarterly.
Yes.
And seconder?
Seconder was going to ask if it could be quarterly.
Okay, so we've got quarterly. Okay, I think I'm the only person who hasn't weighed in on this. I'm going to support the motion, and I want to thank Judge Cordell for her work on this and her work on behalf of the town. I think you really contributed to our ideas about how we do this and have allowed us to come up with a economical and I think practical and I think hopefully efficient and good and transparent method of conducting independent oversight. I look forward to how it works and I look forward to seeing the qualifications of the people that do apply. And I am very hopeful that everyone involved in the process is going to be involved with integrity and as much bias as they can know about and avoid in looking at them. And that knowing that we have this body will give our public more confidence in our police department and how they interact with the public. So thank you. And I'm going to be supporting the motion. Vice Mayor.
One more question, again, of the mayor and or the maker of the motion. I'm assuming, but I should ask, that it would be an objective of this process to have a diverse panel as best we can.
I was certainly making that assumption, Mr. Rennie. That's your assumption in your motion?
Yes.
And seconder? Yes?
Yes.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question then. Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. It passes unanimously. Judge, you're certainly welcome to remain for the discussion of our last item, but if you don't wish to remain, I think that that's okay.
That's
We
fine.
will thank you for your service.
I am going to take my leave, but first may I say that I thank the police chief, your town attorney, your town manager, and you, Mayor, for making this, really making this happen. I've been involved in other efforts that have gone on odd number, just weeks and months, and this was just an amazing process. The collaborative attitude about everyone was really amazing, and I greatly appreciate it. I really do believe that what you all have done tonight can serve as a model for municipalities that are the size of the town of Los Gatos. So I'm very excited about this, and I hope you can take pride in this, because I think you're really kind of breaking ground here, and I think it's wonderful. So thank you all so much for involving me in the process. I am going to take my leave and hopefully not be depressed when I go look at the election stuff. So take care, and thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, bye.
Good night. Which leaves us, Council, with the discussion of the last item, which is a budget adjustment for a non-sworn officer, Mr. Rennie.
Mayor, I'll go ahead and try a motion that we don't take action on this now and ask that they bring it back at next, for consideration at our next budget year.
Okay, let's see, Vice Mayor.
My thoughts exactly, so I'll second it.
Okay, discussion on the motion. So I will jump in with the discussion. I appreciate that there are budget concerns. I would wish that we would, when I thought of this concept, I thought we would be reconfiguring our police department to create this position, not to add a position. I understand what the chief's arguments are. I understand Ms. Pavetti's argument, but in the community conversation and just in my thinking about non-sworn officers, just to my observation and in my experience, when you have particular situations, you bring an armed, fully dressed out, squeaking police officer, if you've ever had a police officer with their belt, they kind of squeak when they walk around, into a situation that doesn't merit it, you can often exacerbate that situation. So a barking dog, somebody I don't know in my neighborhood, a leaf blower. To my mind, that's a perfect opportunity to rethink policing, that that's not appropriate to call a police officer. That's appropriate to call someone else. And so that's why a non-sworn officer would be, in my mind, perfect for that situation. Given that, I will support the motion because I think, the new council can consider it and how they want to do it. But I would have liked, ideally, for us to be creative in thinking about our police department and how we could create that position without adding to our budget. But with that speech, I'll support the motion. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to call the question then. Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, so it passes unanimously. And I think that is it for that item and for our agenda tonight. Thank you all. I did go past my 8 o'clock cutoff, but please go hopefully enjoy the election results. And we will see you next time on November 17th.
Good night.
all.